We're now going to look at the one block, the one and only block to our awareness of love's presence. Isn't that great news? There's only one thing. That's it. Now the ego, interestingly, and that's what we're going to talk about, but the ego would like to have us believe that there are 50 million things we need to work on. There are all these different faults that we need to address in our personality, in our makeup, in our past, in our genealogy, in our parents, going way back ancestrally, culturally, and so on. Forget all that. Good news is there's only one thing we have to work on, and that's recognizing what is the ego so we can release it. Now, for most of us, right, and the only reason you're listening to this is because you, deep inside yourself, like us, when we embarked on this journey, have reached a place where you must be saying to yourself, there's got to be another way. You are ready for another way. What does that mean? It probably means that you're suffering from some kind of disillusionment, that you've had enough now in some areas of your life. For those of us where the dream is just working perfectly, well, obviously this isn't for them and it isn't the time yet. But you're here now, listening, so you're ready. So we're going to look at this thing we call ego. What is this? And as we said at the start in the introduction, we can do all the you are love, you are oneness, you are perfection till the cows come home. Nothing is going to change because the underlying cause of your unhappiness, of your fear, is still 100% in place. And that's why we need to spend the time working on looking at what is the ego. Have no fear because it isn't even real. So let's let our vulnerability dissolve into trust that we can hear what it is that we need to hear in this session and receive with our hearts and our minds that which we need to receive. So to look at what exactly is the ego, Nouk's going to run us through all the attributes of the ego.
So what is the ego? It just so happens to be the self we think we are. So it's you. It's the you think you are. It's not 85% of the you think you are. It's not 95%. It's pretty much 99.9% of who you think you are right now. Unless, of course, you've done a lot of work on undoing the concept, the self-concept, the ego concept. So, if it's 99.9% of who we are, that just shows us how much of our belief system in ourselves and the world that we need to look at to undo. So it's basically a mistaken identity. It's loaded with false beliefs about who we are, who others are, and the purpose of the world. It's the one block to the awareness of love's presence, which we've told you before. But love is who we are. That's who we really are. So there's a serious incongruency because we don't know that we're love. Ego is the block. Therefore, we don't know who we are. Yet we spend our lives trying to get love. Very, very confusing. There are only two things in our lives. There's love or fear. And the ego entity or the mistaken identity that we think we are is run by fear. We'd like to think it's run by love, but it's really run by fear. It's really an I that operates apart from God. It's basically a will that runs counter to the divine. It's basically saying, look, I'm in charge and God's asleep. That's how we run our lives because we don't trust, and the word is trust, we don't trust the divine to run our lives. We use our independent will.
We call this free will, which is really funny, isn't it? You see, because our true aligned will with God only wants whatever is absolutely the best for us. Total love, total joy, total abundance. That is the will of the divine. That is our will. But what we want is free will, which essentially means I want to suffer. Is that not the funniest thing? It's like a skit out of Monty Python. That's what this life is like. Because we're there seriously upholding this mistaken identity of who we think we are, which, for example, might mean a name. My name is Tomas, and I am a spiritual teacher and author. Well, that's laughable. Laughable because this is just a shell. This is just an illusion of who we are. Even at its best, it's a faint remembrance of who we truly are. It's not the real self. The real self is part of the oneness, is awareness, is unconditional love. There is no I in that. But we are so identified with this, and we take free will as something that we will fight and indeed die for.
So the ego is the law of deprivation. It's always seeking. It always believes it doesn't have. And it's always looking at the past or the future. You know you're in ego when you want something. You know you're in ego when you want to get, when you want to have, or say you feel you need to become better. That's the ego. Other times the ego will express itself by saying, well, you need to avoid or resist a circumstance or a situation or even a person. These are all tactics from the ego, and all to show you or to prove to you the illusion that you don't have all your needs met in the now moment. The truth is there's only one moment, and that's now. And the other truth is that all our needs are met now and forever. But the ego keeps us in a continual cycle of thinking that we need to have, or we need to avoid, we need to get, or we need to concern ourselves with the future. All of this is based on the past, and the whole process is geared so that we never spend time in the now, because it's in the now, when we look through Spirit's eyes, we see that we actually have everything, and that there's no need to control anything. This is another thing the ego does too. It is continually trying to control. While it has control, the divine has no say and has no control. It thinks that way. The big thing about the ego is that it has an undivided mantra, and the mantra is seek and do not find. When I say undivided, it's consistent. See, this all runs unconsciously too. So, give you an example. Many years ago, we wanted a house. So we used the law of attraction back in those days, the basic, to attract the house. And what happened, because we hadn't done a sufficient enough ego, what happened was that the ego came in the back door or the back window or whatever. We got the house, great. But then we lost our car and one of us got sick. That's how the ego works. It's always getting you to seek your completion from outside and in the future. So the law of deprivation, and I know this sounds very depressing, and it has to sound depressing, because we won't change unless we really see what this ego does. And we don't need to have any fear, guilt or shame about it either. And we don't need to have any judgment, any negative judgment upon that. It's just that we need to look at how the egos run our lives until now. So, if we look at this very clearly, we'll see that any fear, any sense of guilt or anger, any judgments that we make, any fear of loss or scarcity, deprivation, and the need to control, these are all attributes of the ego. So, if we're to be honest, we could say that we're in ego most of the time, because we think we need to control. In actual fact, we don't need to control anything. We just need to let it be.
Even many of our good acts, and this might be a little disturbing, but if we were to truly examine all the good deeds we do, our efforts at fundraising for Save the Whales or the dogs or the dolphins, our Friday night session down at the goodwill center or feeding the homeless and so on, if we're dead set honest about it, why are we doing it? Is it really coming from love? Or are we trying to buy a backdoor ticket to heaven? See, a lot of us still have this notion that we are a victim of the world we see, so we better bet up on the side of good in the hope that we will get some salvation. This is the ego. And I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but I certainly have. You know, back in the day when I was trying to secure my way to heaven through the back door and working for the church and doing all these good deeds. And then I'd find one day that, for example, a bill came in that I was not expecting and I certainly couldn't pay for it. Well, the outcome of that was standing outside the door with my fists raised up to the heavens, yelling, "Where are you? Why have you forsaken me? Look at all the good things that I do. How could this be happening to me?" Can you relate? And then here's the kicker. That isn't the worst part. The kicker is that then you feel really guilty afterwards. Because you know you're trying to be good. And then guess what? All that just went right out the window because you now find yourself swearing at this God that's outside of yourself and then feeling guilty for it. You see, this has all been the ego's fault. So I'd like to give you this one word right now: authenticity. Be authentic. Forget being good. Give it up. Throw it out. Stop it. Just stop it. At least stop it long enough to examine why the heck you're doing it. Because if the motivation is coming from ego, and its mantra, as Nouk has said, is seek and do not find, all that will happen is that you'll double up on your guilt. Nouk mentioned how the ego likes to have, to get, to become, and to avoid. Well, all that's around being in the future and being in the past, to make sure you're never in the now moment. Because if you actually entered the now moment, took a few deep breaths, you'd realize you're fine. Right here, right now. Not tomorrow, not even an hour from now. Right here, right now. You're fine. And in that sense of perfection, where is the ego? It isn't there. The ego can never be in the now moment. And so that's why it keeps you always in front or behind, looking at the future or the past. The ego makes sure that it's a seek and do not find mission by always putting the cart before the horse. This is the other thing that it likes to do. And what do I mean by that? Let's say that the cart is the love, the generosity, the unconditional acceptance, the abundance, the joy that you want, that each of us wants desperately in this life. That's in the cart. Well, what the ego does is places the cart in front of the horse. Now, what's the horse? The horse is actually what we need to do. Our homework, if you like. And the only thing that we need to do. Which is what? Which is to practice the extension of love and to practice forgiveness. Instead of doing the work, which is to forgive everyone in every circumstance in our life, and to extend love even when we aren't feeling particularly loving, the ego tells us, get out the front and seek your happiness, seek your love, seek your peace. One of the ego's favorite games is when I get the next job, when I get the next pay rise, when I get the new partner, when my kid grows up, when my mother leaves my house, when whatever it is. That's what the ego does. But you see, it places the cart in front of the horse. The truth of the matter is that if we remove that cart, forget about the cart, worked on extending love and applying forgiveness, we would find all the love and peace and joy that we're searching for. But we can never get it while we're searching for it. And this is just a very clear example to show you how the ego seeks and does not find, and how it places everything upside down. And that's why in many ways what we need to do on this journey is to look at everything and be prepared to have everything turned upside down. All our beliefs, values, opinions, all of them. Turn them over to the divine. Allow the universal inspiration to reinterpret. But the ego, it'll never do that. It likes to separate and compartmentalize. So for example, it will say, you know what? I like the spiritual journey. Let's go do a meditation class. That's terrific. Let's go do one a day, every day. Well, I'm happy. I'm with you on that. And then it keeps separate from you the fact that it entertains this sense of deprivation in terms of, for example, money. So I've always not got enough money. So that means that when my kids or anybody asks for money, I actually get angry and point my finger and yell at them and tell them about the scarcity of money. Not recognizing that if I have scarcity anywhere, it's going to flow across every other part of my life. So all the meditating in the world isn't going to make one darn bit of difference. This is what the ego does. So right now, let's just do a little exercise for yourselves. Okay? We've mentioned a few things. Get your pad, get your paper out right now. And from what we've mentioned already, ask yourself, when am I in ego? When am I in ego? Remembering that we've said all the times that we want to avoid, all the times when we want to get, all the times when we want to have. What do you want to get? What's on your wish list? What judgments are you making right now? What grievances do you still hold? Can you identify certain people or situations that you have made a judgment on? What are you fearful of? Are you fearful of dying? Are you fearful of ill health? Are you fearful of poverty? Are you fearful that your child's going to leave you, or your parents are going to leave you? What other fears of the future are you harboring? So you can see just from asking those questions and then reflecting on how much of your day is spent thinking about those thoughts. How do I get more money? How do I not lose my partner? How do I get this? And so on. You can see how what Nouk was saying, this identity of who we think we are, which is the ego, is actually operating 99.9% of our day. And if that's the case, how much room is there for spirit to speak to us? How much room is there for the universal inspiration, which is within you and has always been a part of you and will always be a part of you? How can you hear that voice when all day long the only voice we hear is the voice of the ego? So while we might move on shortly, this is an exercise that you can keep to the side and really spend some time looking at it, because these are the pearls. See, the ego wants to tell you, oh my God, these are my shameful bits, these are my guilty bits, these are the parts that I don't want to share with anybody or tell anybody. Well, the thing is that these are the very bits that we need to shine to the light, because it's in bringing these bits up to the light that we discover and experience, more importantly, for ourselves. Experience that they were nothing, that there's nothing to be guilty of, that nothing ever happened, there's nothing to be shameful. And in fact, eventually, as we lead you through this process of undoing and developing trust, you'll learn that every one of those events or incidents were actually perfectly helpful to get you to where you are right now. So you may want to hit pause right now and complete this exercise, or you may want to set this exercise aside and we'll carry on for now. I want to mention a little bit more about the ego, manifesting from the ego, as Nouk mentioned before. See, the funny thing about manifesting from the ego is that all it does is bring suffering. Why? Because until we've undone that sense of deprivation, which is the ego, as soon as we acquire something, we're going to be scared of losing it. Now we have to spend a whole bunch of time and energy protecting it. So where is the joy in what we've just acquired? Or, worse, we're like a little kid, 3 minutes with it and we're looking for the next high, the next fix. Well, that was great. Okay, I just need one more thing to feel secure, to feel happy. And we're off manifesting the next thing. You see, the whole time it's keeping us from being in the very present moment, in the now moment, where we can undo the ego, where there is no ego. Earlier in our introduction, we also talked about the separation being a tiny mad idea. Well, the ego is that part of the mind that believes the separation was real. It believes that it actually ran away from home, which is impossible. But it believes it ran away from home, and guess what? The big fella is after us. So because the big fella is after us, we've got to hide. So how do we hide? The ego made up the world, and we continue running into this world. And you can imagine this subcommittee of fearful egos, if there ever was such a thing, sitting around going, how do we hide? How do we hide? What do we do? Well, okay, let's make up genders, male and female. Good idea. What else can we do? Well, let's have different colors. Let's have different races. Let's have different languages. But how do we make this experience of being like an ego real? Let's have a body. Good idea. Body's a great idea. But how do we make this body seem real? Well, blood. Blood's always good because it runs out. And then you die. You die? That's perfect. Let's have birth and death. Now the paradigm is closed. It seems believable. We're born, spend a lifetime suffering, few moments of joy, and you die. That's it. And that's the ego's goal. Salvation doesn't come after death. Salvation comes now. And that's why the only game in town is to wake up now. So it's better to die to who you think you are now before who you think you are dies. The ego's game is, it's like running the clock down, you see. So rather than enacting anything that's going to wake you up, it'll say, oh, but we've got to work on these other things, like our career, like money, and we've got to fix other people's problems, and we've got to fix the world's problems for a start. So if we've dedicated our whole life to that, and then comes that fateful day, and the buzzer goes off. Brr, life over. Ego won, spirit nil. But there it is, celebrating our continual tracking in this dream, round and round and round. And it all seems different, doesn't it? Because in appearance, it is different. If there was such a thing as past lives, so I come back as a female one time and then a male this time and something else next time and so on, it all appears different. But it's actually all part of the same one dream, the same one instant of the desire to separate, which comes just from the fear that it was real and that we have to run and that we're guilty. And that guilt that we feel deep in us has to be projected outwards, because we couldn't possibly live with that horrible guilt that we ran away from home. So what the ego does is it projects it outwards. Another thing about the ego is that it continually has to say, I'm right and I'm okay and I'm innocent and you're not. If you don't think that's true, ask yourselves how many arguments you have and how often you're prepared to say, you know what, you can win this, it's okay. I don't need to be right at all, ever. That doesn't happen. we need to be right. Somehow we associate being right with being real and with being innocent. And this again is just the ego.
The ego projected the body. That's a big one. It took me many years to embrace that concept. So the ego projected the body. So that means that you and I are not victims of illness or random disease or aging or disabilities. We're not victims because it is the ego that projected the body. We are not the body. That's immensely freeing when we realize that. When we realize that it's the ego that projects illness onto the body, that is when we can take back that illness. We can take back that original decision, that wrong-minded decision that's usually unconscious until we raise it to the surface. We can take that decision back. We can go to spirit with it, and then we can undo the cause of the illness. This is really, really important. See, what it is that causes illness in the body or disease or whatever are not random germs or accidents or whatever. What it is this deep unconscious guilt that is the ego. That's the nature of the ego, and it is deeply unconscious. That's what causes all of the problems that we have in our lives. And so it's important for us to begin the process of unveiling or unearthing where this unconscious guilt lies. So one of the first keys in the process, most important, is to observe the ego, is for us, as Tomas said before, our vulnerability. Vulnerability is our strength. So it is important for us to become courageous enough to look at where we're operating from the ego, so we can distinguish where the problem is lying. And we do that by practicing observing whenever we're in ego. If we forget, and say we're in an argument or a conflict, or we've got lost in our own physical pain or emotional pain, what we can do is go back to it after the conflict or after the physical pain. We can go back and just observe without judgment. Observe what is happening. And that's the first key, which is just to become the watcher of the ego without judgment. Don't fall into the trap that Tomas and I did earlier, which was to observe, but observe with the ego, because the ego is the one that judges you and says you shouldn't do that. So I might begin by giving a little bit of background on this word that's used a lot in A Course in Miracles called projection. Everything in this universe comes from thought. So, to give an illustration of that, in quantum physics today, there is a term called the observer effect. And the observer effect basically means that there is no reality unless that reality is first observed. Right? See how it changes cause and effect? We think that everything outside of us is the cause, and whatever happens to us is the effect. And it's the other way around. So I'll just repeat that. The observer effect means that there is no reality out there unless that reality is first observed. So that takes us back to the observer. In order for there to be any effect, in order for there to be anything in this universe, any bodies, any solid objects like buildings, roads, countries, planets, all of these objects, there needs to be an observer first. That is the position of cause. That is it, because it comes from a thought. Everything in the universe comes from a thought. So taking that in this context, we take that back to projection that is used by A Course in Miracles. What we're saying here is that we were the first thought that spawned the whole illusion of a universe in the first place. So let's ask who this we is. What we say is that before the thought of separation, in other words, before the thought of a separated universe, time and space, there was just oneness. There was just all-inclusive, eternal, infinite oneness, which equals love, with no opposite. That's all there ever was. That is who we are. But this is so far removed from the life or the experience we've had here as an ego, it's very difficult for us to begin to understand, let alone accept. So we won't go too much into all of this, except to say that A Course in Miracles says very clearly there that it was the thought of separation that caused the universe to come into being. So we are the cause. In other words, the we think we are right now, the ego, was the cause of everything afterwards. There had to be a thought first before there ever could be a body. So as I sit here speaking to you in the studio, I made this body. I, the ego, the mistaken identity, made this body so that this voice could come through it to speak to you right now. And you made your body through the ego to have the ears to listen to me speaking to you right now. So it is important that we first realize that we are the ones who made the body. We are the ones who spawned the universe with our crazy and tiny mad idea of separation. We thought, hey, wouldn't it be great to experience otherness? And the universe was spawned. So therefore, we must take responsibility in that we originally made our body. This is very important. Going on to projection, taking it to the next step, we also made everything else. So, taking it back to, say, me personally here, is that everybody in my life came into my life because I made that happen. Okay, I'm not conscious of it, and neither are you conscious of all of the people you've brought into your life or all the experiences that you've drawn to you, but this is truth. The truth is that we have projected that. Now, taking it back a little bit further here, projection makes perception. So when we decided to try and escape the seeming mass of unconscious guilt, when we had that thought that there could be something other than God, we just had that thought, we thought of otherness. What we did is we experienced so much unconscious guilt and we thought it was real. See, this is it. We believed it. We believed we were guilty. Of course, we're not guilty, never were, never could be. But at that point in time, we really did. So this spawned the entire universe, the world, our bodies, and the seeming cycle of all of these different lifetimes. See, what happened was that we projected first. That was the first thing we did. First thing was projection, and the second thing that occurred was perception. In the universe, this is how we perceive. We don't have direct knowledge here in this paradigm called the universe of time and space. All we have is perception. Perception is the only thing or tool that we have in order to make our way home, like the breadcrumbs on the trail through the wilderness. This is how we're going to go home. Now, we can either put our perception in the hands of the ego, as we do while we're asleep as an ego, believing our dream, believing life, or now, while we're learning to wake up and undo the ego, we could put our perception in the hands of the divine, which is the universal inspiration, so that it can show us how to wake up, how to undo this entire dream, how to undo all of the perceptual blocks that we've had so far. So at the time of separation, broadly speaking, what occurred is all there was, is, and ever shall be is love, is God awareness. That's all. But what happened is obviously some part of that oneness decided to forget its oneness. That's all that happened. And it didn't really happen. It's just that we're dreaming it happened as we're here right now. So this part of God, the oneness, forgot for an instant. In A Course in Miracles, it says it was an instant in which the Son of God remembered not to laugh. It's a joke, but we take it all so seriously. And it is just this part. We as one decided to forget we were one. And this entire life experience is that we forgot. And so the essence of waking up is that we need to remember. We need to remember that we're one. And as you'll learn more while we go through this program, one of the biggest keys here is to learn that all of it is coming from me. So all of it is coming from you. Everything. Yeah. But with no guilt, with no shame, with no judgment. So it is that if I'm talking personally about the separation, I will say that I, as the God Self, forgot I was the God Self and made myself a dream. But because we're all one, even here in time and space, we're all one, I need to remember that you who are listening to my voice right now are me. I also need to remember that Tomas is me, and that the guy that cut me off in traffic this morning is me. I need to remember that the school teacher who nearly broke my hand in grade 4 because I did the wrong thing is me. So it's really about owning that we are all one, that we're not separate. And the way that we do this is through exercising this, through observing how we work on ourselves, what we're thinking, what's happening, and through what we'll call quantum forgiveness, which we'll talk about later on. And it's about recognizing that anything that happens to us is not random. Everything that happens to us is what we have called for, albeit unconsciously, it's all that we've called for. And that there's nothing wrong in our lives. There never is anything wrong in our lives. Everything happens divinely. So everything in life, even the suffering, can be used as a learning opportunity. A Course in Miracles often refers to the classroom. This is a classroom. We're in a classroom, and when we change our mind and realize that this is a classroom, and the goal is not what we thought it was, which is to fix a dream, in other words, to satiate all the ego's dysfunctional desires. That's not the goal, to be born and die, only to come back with another ego that's going to do the same thing. That's not the goal. The goal is to wake up. The goal is to end suffering. The goal is to know, which is to be aware and live in that awareness of the immense joy and love that we are. That's our goal. It's very different. So the only way that we can achieve that goal is to become aware of what the ego is. Much of what we're discussing in this program may raise some pretty deep fears in you, and that's okay, because you'll probably find that many of your long-held values will seem to be threatened by what we're saying here. That is good. Please don't throw it out, okay? Please don't throw it out, because it's good. Because whatever is threatened, whatever fears might arise within you, this is great, because this is a golden opportunity for you to actually look at something. It doesn't mean that you need to change your ideas. It doesn't mean you need to leave long-held values. You can still keep them. That's fine. We're not trying to rip anything away from you here. All we're doing is simply asking you to look. That's all we're doing. Just look and keep an open mind. And you will find that during the program's unveiling, that many of the questions or fears that have been raised will be answered. And that hopefully, with our past experience in this, that a lot of those fears will fall away. And you'll see something that you will gravitate towards and that you will want to embrace through this process.
It's been our experience in working with this stuff that oftentimes, because this is the scary part, looking at what is the ego, it's been our experience that at this juncture where we're doing this kind of work, there's a whole bunch of values, as Nouk was just saying, or beliefs that you have held sacred or important up to this point that you suddenly find might be threatened. It would be a good point in time also right now to make a list of those beliefs. So you can either pause now and make a list, of what are your fears at this point in time? What are you scared of giving up or losing in the process? Or even, what are you angry about when you're hearing this? All of these are the pearls right here and now. These are the bits of wisdom that are going to help you in your journey. So you can write those now and pause this, or you can set this exercise, but make sure you come back to it, because it's these buttons that are being pressed. These are actually the very points of your release. These are the very points where the ego is trying to hold on dearly, and where if you would just allow the universal inspiration to reinterpret it for you, you will find that that is where the miracle of coming home to yourself is. Nothing will be lost. It's just allowing it to be reinterpreted for value. So, already what we've mentioned before is that some of these, and I'll use the word sacred cows that we have in this life, and the ones that Nouk and I had to confront, were around marriage, relationship, the body and the sacredness of the body. Whole bunch of do's and don'ts in this society that we have, the law, all of this kind of stuff that we hold so sacred. All of this has to be lifted up and allowed to be reinterpreted. Because what we don't yet recognize is that all these things that we hold sacred actually limit us. They are actually our prison. They are actually the block to the awareness of love's presence. And with projection, as Nouk was saying, what's happening there is that imagine that the projector is in your mind, because that is where it is, in your mind. And what's happening is that it's screening a movie out through your eyes, complete with audio through your ears, and the sensory through your nose, through touch, etc. But the projector is in your mind. And why we say this is like a black comedy, something out of Monty Python, is because we project everything that we make up in our life onto this screen called life. And then when it reflects back to us, we act shocked. Like, oh my God, this is new. Where did this come from? I can't believe this is happening to me. And then we react back to that. Right? So if somebody cuts us off, then we get angry. If somebody insults us, then we insult them back. Or we find some way that we have to defend, and so on. Not recognizing that really the issue is actually happening in our mind. So what we need to do is actually address the cause being in the mind. So if we find that we're in conflict a lot with people right now, if you find that you're having a lot of conflict, the issue isn't with the person that's out there. There is no person out there. There's only one of us. The issue is in your mind. And what we're going to look at over the course of this program is to start examining what it is about ourselves that we need to attack ourselves with. Why is it that I need to manifest this person that seems to be attacking me right now? That's what we need to look at, because we want to heal cause and effect. But the first step in healing cause and effect is taking full responsibility for cause and effect. I am not a victim of the world I see. It's all happening because it's happening inside me. So projection, which makes perception, is one of the areas that we need to look at. We mentioned very briefly before that any felt sense of fear, guilt, anger, judgment, loss, scarcity, or the need to control, or any loss of peace, is the ego. That's it, right there. Every time we feel any of those senses. You see, because we could only feel fearful because we've forgotten who we are. We think we are alone. We think we are isolated. We think we are a body. We really believe that we can be born and die, as opposed to being eternal, safe, at home. And judgment, we could only... Judgment is an attempt at making something that's unreal, real. What do I mean by that? Well, the only thing that's real is truth. And if we believe that we are love, and love is all, then the only truth is love. Which means the only thing that's real is love. Anything else is false. But a judgment is an attempt to make something that's false real. So for example, if your neighbor says something and you take offense and you make it real, and you make a judgment against your neighbor, you're trying to make something unreal real. Why do I say that? Because your neighbor is just a reflection of your divinity. In truth, who they are is love. In this illusion called life, because they, like us, have forgotten who we are, we're acting out of our fear. We're acting out of our aloneness. We're acting out of our ego. Our job here is to remember that who they are. And that's why we say the platform for waking up is forgiveness. Because it's in forgiving the other that we remember who we are. It's a lovely side benefit that your neighbor feels forgiven, but that's not why we do it. Why we do it is to remember that we are one, and that the only acts are either an act of love or a cry for love. And our neighbor is simply exhibiting a cry for love. And when we forgive by overlooking completely what it is that they've done, we help them remember who they are. Because for them to have acted that way must mean that they are in fear, must mean that they are shameful and guilty and undeserving of love. For why else would you cry for love? That's what we all do. And that's what the ego is trying to do. The ego is always trying to separate us, to make us different, and to make the body real. Because if it makes the body real, then we can't be one in spirit. And yet that's all that we are, is spirit. We are actually outside of our bodies. And later on in the program, we're going to undertake some guided meditations to take you to that place where you can be the observer of all your thoughts, of all your sensations. Be the observer of your body and notice that you are not your body. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. So for now, those parts that feel uneasy for you in the presentation so far, they are wonderful. Please don't lose them. Hold on to those, write them down, note them down. Because they are all nothing more than those parts that are saying, I wish to be a will apart from God. So let's talk about forgiveness for a second if we can. What we don't want to do is practice this world's idea of forgiveness. So let me give you the ego's idea of forgiveness. First of all, let's imagine it's like a baseball game. 3 strikes and you're out. So, first ball is that you did something wrong. Strike 1. The something wrong that you did really hurt me. So, strike 2, because I've personalized it and I've made a separate you and a separate me. In strike 3, the separate me is going to be big enough to forgive and overlook the separate you. That's the way this world forgives. So in fact, that forgiveness is entrenching that what happened was real and that what you did truly did hurt me. That's the ego's idea of forgiveness. Later on, we're going to look at quantum forgiveness. But for now, just resonate with this if you can, which is to recognize that there was nobody to forgive if I am the projector of this movie. All that's happened is I've shown myself some part of myself that's attacking me. And what I need to do is forgive that. At the level of form which we live in with our bodies, yes, the other partner is going to receive a benefit of my forgiveness. But that's not why I'm doing the forgiveness. That's not why I'm practicing the forgiveness. I'm practicing the forgiveness at the quantum level, which is to use every incident that I lose peace, to help me remember, oh, I have forgotten that we are one. The fact that I have taken offense to anything that's happened outside of myself has been an act of separation. And so I overlook this completely in the recognition that there is nothing outside of me, that there is only one, and that we are all one. And that in truth, because we are love at home safe, there is nothing that you could do that could truly hurt me. At the level of form, it might appear that way. And sure, at the level of form, we need to protect ourselves. But what we're talking about here is healing the mind, at the level of content, at the level of the mind.
Our mind, as the Course in Miracles says, is split. There are really three parts to our mind. There is who we think we are, which is the ego, and until we begin to wake up, that's all we have. But when we begin to wake up, we see and we have a look at the mind. The mind is split into, say, two boxes side by side with a dome above it. So if you can visualize this now, two boxes side by side with a dome above. On the right-hand side would be the ego. On the left side would be the universal inspiration, spirit, and the dome above that encompasses across the top is the decision maker. So, especially when we're beginning this journey, it's important to look at that and see that we can be the decision maker in every moment of our lives if we want to. So, one way to do that is the second you feel any loss of peace. In other words, the second you feel conflict within or without, whatever, is to go to be the observer, the watcher. Right? This is the decision maker, which is the dome above, the split mind. And being the decision maker, we can then decide upon what the best plan is. So we can go with the ego, and we will know once we've done this a few times that that always leads to suffering. Or we can go with the divine, which is the universal inspiration. But at all times we're the decision maker. That's why it's so important. The first key to undoing the ego is to practice awareness, is to become the watcher of all your emotions, the watcher of your thoughts, the watcher of the seeming world that's going on outside of you. Until you do that, what happens is that you become the emotion when your buttons are pressed. So to give you an example, in our early relationship, Tomas and I, in those early days, before we began to wake up, there was lots of confusion and lots of conflict. And I really thought that he was the problem, not me. But as I learnt and I began to become the observer, I realized really it was coming from me. Because before that, this idea of projection was just an intellectual concept, and I couldn't, for the life of me, understand it or accept it fully and really live it. It wasn't until I began to observe our conflicts and really observe those times where I believed it was he that was at fault, or that he was causing my suffering, or that he should change. It wasn't until I got to those stages and became the observer of the emotion I was feeling. Often it would be rejection, feelings of abandonment, feelings of being invalidated. I mean, you're listening to this if you know what I'm speaking about, because you've experienced it yourself. It's these feelings, when they're triggered, have a look at who outside seems to be causing it, or what outside seems to be causing it, and just observe it, take one step back from the emotion. And that's when we can start to see how the ego works. And that's when our trust in spirit develops more and more incrementally as we withdraw our trust from the ego and our blind reactions to whatever seems to be happening outside of us. And we deposit that trust, or we transfer that trust to the divine, and we become the observer. We're watching it. What happens in this miraculous circumstance is that we learn not to take things so personally. And it's in not taking things so personally that we're able to be the observer even more. And paradoxically, we're able to be more present and way more loving than we ever were before. And because we're more loving, people are more loving to us, circumstances flow, and we begin to really see the benefits of this whole process. So it's not all bad in the beginning.
Everything in this world is actually neutral. We assign all the meaning that it has for us. And a huge part of the transfer of trust from the ego to spirit that we're going to be talking about, and we are talking about now, is about, first of all, saying that we acknowledge that we have assigned all the meaning that anything has to us. Because when we own up to that, then the second stage is easy, which is to ask spirit to come in and reinterpret what is the meaning of everything in front of us. What is the meaning of this body? What is the meaning of this house? What is the meaning of my job? What is the meaning of my belief system? All of these things we have taken on board and taken for granted, never actually opening them up for further investigation or interpretation. And so, whenever anything in our life is uninterpreted or uninvestigated, the ego uses it. And how does the ego use it? To hurt us. So, for example, you may hold on to right now a dwelling that you're really proud of or comfortable in or really desire, or it gives you great self-esteem or it gives you great security. But if you're identified with that as your safety, as your security, as your identity, I can bet with you that you also have great anxiety about the potential for losing it. And this is what I mean about how the ego uses everything that has meaning and assigns the meaning to it, gives it a priority so that you can then suffer either from the desire for it or from the fear of losing it. And so it's about, I hope you're getting the picture, but slowly, it's about letting go of the steering wheel. It's about us letting go of our belief systems of who we are and what things mean to us. It's about letting go of all of that and allowing that to be reinterpreted for us. It's in that we can then begin to wake up and we start developing trust. And what do we mean by waking up anyway? I mean, what we're talking about here is to be able to experience the peace of God and to be able to experience everlasting love here, right now. And what does that mean, everlasting love? Well, this desire to just give and the recognition that giving is receiving. There's no more desire to get anything. There's only a deep desire to share what it is that you have. And it's a final realization. Realization meaning has to be experienced. That the only way you keep anything is by giving it all away. See, again, the ego, when we look at the ego, this whole life is about acquiring, isn't it? I mean, we've got magazines, the Forbes, whatever, richest people, and the this and the that, all the wonderful things we've acquired, all our material possessions for which we take great pride in. Again, now, there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's what is the intent? Because if the intent behind the acquisitions of anything is from the ego, then all it will do is bring you suffering. So, awakening does not mean that I have to stand in the lap with a baking bowl in Calcutta anymore. You know, awakening can mean I am fully abundant, prosperous, and have all of these wonderful possessions around me. The difference is, I'm not attached to any single one of them. And if you walked in and said, oh, I'd like to have that, then I would give that gladly to you. That would be being awake.
We might look now at what would come under the umbrella of the word judgment. Because in the days before I really was beginning to wake up, I used to think judgment was just whenever I made a negative judgment against somebody else. That was judgment. But in the process of undoing my ego, I got to see that judgment is a fairly broad umbrella, and if we want to become the observer and not the victim, we need to look at what judgment might be. So these are some of the things, we'll just go through a few points here, some of the things that might constitute a judgment. By the way, I'm not speaking about discernment here. Discernment, I like to use that word for the divine, because it's the divine that discerns. The divine never judges, because the divine never sees any sin. That's a good thing, isn't it? There is no sin. There was never any sin. So we're all guiltless and always will be. But what Spirit does here in the classroom we call life is discern. So it discerns what needs to occur and what doesn't need to occur. It just discerns of its own. And as we open up to Spirit, in other words, as the block, the ego, gradually dissolves, we are more open to actually listening to the voice of Spirit, or hearing or sensing or feeling the voice of Spirit through intuition. And that lets us know not to make judgments, but rather to make discernments, which never hurt anybody, by the way, not you or anybody else. So what is judgment? Usually judgment is something that does hurt you at some level. If not you, it'll hurt somebody else at some level. And whenever we judge, we're believing a negative thought. We're making this thought real for us. And what happens then is that we're projecting it outwards. We're projecting it either, say, if we're fearful of our own illness and our body is diseased, well, the more fear and the more judgment we have about our body being diseased, the more we're going to actually project that out onto the body. So it doesn't help to project a negative thought onto the body. So another example there might be for the body too is that I don't exercise enough, I should lose weight. Those sorts of judgments are critical judgments that can only harm and only seek to perpetuate the ego's cycle of causing you even more unconscious guilt. So those sorts of judgments on your body, judgments against others, judgments that might compare yourself to another, either raising yourself up or lowering yourself down, these are all judgments that are going to hurt you in some way, shape or form, because they're projections that are coming from the ego, which seek to consolidate any unconscious guilt. By the way, unconscious guilt equals the suffering factor in our lives. That's very important. It is the suffering factor. Usually it's unconscious, but the suffering is not unconscious. We recognize the suffering, but it's this unconscious guilt caused from all of these micro judgments, thousands if not millions of judgments that we make every day against others, against situations, against God, Spirit, and against ourselves. So it is important to become the observer and look at that. What else comes under that umbrella of judgment? Any sense of resistance that we might have. Resistance to maybe hearing something, resistance to something happening, a situation occurring. An example here is, say I have an appointment, a very important appointment in town. I need to get there by 3 o'clock and no later. At 20 to 3, I find I have a flat tyre on the side of the highway. There is nobody to help me. I go to change the tyre and realise that there's no spare. You've been there before, I'm sure. What happens? Frustration, resistance. In that resistance where we say, look, something's wrong, what we're saying is that God is wrong. God is wrong. I am unsupported in this instant. And that's a judgment. That's a judgment that comes back and increases that unconscious guilt as well. So anything that we feel we're avoiding or resisting, we need to look at that. Doesn't mean we need to change it. We just need to look at it. The next one is the need to control. And this is big, because if you're like me, then you will probably find that your need to control is quite strong. In other words, you think you're right. That's the ego. It thinks it's right. It thinks it knows best. It thinks that God or the divine is asleep and that we're in charge. So the need to control might come out, say, if you're a parent and you have a teenage child, the need to control might be that you tell your child that you know better than that child. You know that that child must go to college, must have a good education. The child should do X, Y, and Z. Say we see our child undergoing some form of suffering, or a friend or our partner, and it seems like there's nothing we can do about it. But we still go into this need to control. We may not actually physically do anything about it, but the simple fact that we have anxiety and worry going on and concern within us, what we're saying is we feel we need to take control because the divine is not supporting us. That's another form of judgment. Any need to try and rescue somebody from what is, from what's happening right now. What is happening is divine. It's always divine. Whatever is happening, if you can't change it, it's divine. Byron Katie has this wonderful theme in her book, Loving What Is. And what it is she says that there's my business, there's your business, and there's God's business. And where we get into trouble is that we forget that there's God is in charge of all of our business, really, but we forget that there's my business and your business, and we try and rescue others from their own business. So what we're trying to do, in effect, is we're trying to rescue them from what we think is a type of breakdown, and what we're doing is we're holding them back from having a breakthrough. That's a really good way to see that. So there's no need to really rescue anybody unless, of course, we're guided through Spirit to help to rescue somebody in a situation. Of course, if somebody's having a hard time, you know how to help them, you go ahead and do that. That's perfect. And judgment is always based on the past. It's never in the now moment. Discernment comes in the now moment. Discernment is holy. It's sacred. It comes from the divine part of us. So judgment comes from the past. It's based on the ego, and it's based on sort of shadow figures that are superimposed from the past, or shadow situations that we either consciously remember or unconsciously remember, and we bring them into the present moment. We superimpose them on the people we see and the circumstances that we encounter. And so we're never really there in the present moment, which is the only real moment that any true change can occur if we're using judgment. So judgment is something that we all need to learn to actually observe. And then as we observe it, a beautiful thing occurs is it falls away naturally. It just falls away. This is part of this undoing process. The development of trust that we're talking about here is that anything that we're addicted to, or the ego's addicted to, we don't need to give up that addiction. It's not like we control that addiction, because that inevitably will recycle and return again. What occurs when we observe with Spirit, with the divine, is that whatever the addiction is, and we're talking about judgment right now, they fall away. They have to fall away. Everything that's observed with Spirit that is negative must fall away eventually. So our job is to just look at the judgments without any further condemnation of others or self. And you know what we say also about judgment here is that the aim of spiritual awakening is not to cease making judgments. So get that out of your head. It's not to cease making judgments. The real aim is to stop judging ourselves from making those judgments. That's a huge one. That's a huge one. And so much so, over our years of writing and teaching, we have made this very, very powerful and short meditation, which we will have on our final session of this program. And it's a short meditation to take you through the stages of relinquishing judgment. So that means relinquishing fear, relinquishing anything that might cause us unpeace. Very, very valuable meditation. We're about to introduce a little exercise here, and it's titled, What are your favorite illusions of identity? This is where we get to find out where our ego sticks or sticks us, where our little pockets of sacred cows might lie, and where those ones that might be hidden from us might lie as well. Not for you to get rid of them, not for you to change them, but just for you to see them again, to observe them and to look at them with Spirit. It's in this act that you're giving yourself a chance to just observe, just take a step back and allow Spirit to reinterpret what these things are for. Okay? So which areas do you identify strongly with? Which do you have strong beliefs or values in? and which play a strong part of how you identify yourself in your life. Your best friend here will be your willingness to answer with radical self-honesty. So we have a list, and this list is in our book, Take Me to Truth. I might read through the list, and with your pen and pad, you might want to jot down these few things. And from this list, please take some time to actually honestly inquire as to which you feel most attached to. And another way of doing this might be, there might be nothing on this list that you identify with personally. There might be something that you feel you could not do without in this life. It might be a person, it might be an object, it might be a circumstance, situation, whatever. So just get in contact with what that is with radical self-honesty. And so here is the list. Partner and relationships, nation, race or tribe, your fears, career or business, body image, health and age, friends or enemies, authority, your thoughts, politics, your feelings, the past and or the future, illness or disability, material objects, addictions, your experiences, your role or status, your finances, desires, past conditioning, your education, your habits, or your children, or perhaps maybe your parents or siblings, your beliefs, opinions and values. Now, as I said earlier, there may be others to add to this list, but a little exercise here would be to just mark down your top 5 illusions.
Another helpful way to answer that is, how do you introduce yourself to people? You know, like, hi, I'm a dad, or I'm a counselor, or I'm an author, I'm a teacher, I'm a mother. These are all sacred cows, aren't they? Because you might be feeling within yourself right now, wait a minute, I am a father, I am a mother. We're not saying that your role at the level of form hasn't been to be and isn't a mother or a father. But to identify yourself as a father or a mother would be incorrect, would be hurting you. Because what we're trying to say by that, by hurting you, is that then if any of those roles get threatened, you're in fear. You're afraid that you're going to lose yourself. Because if, for example, and certainly you probably know people, but I know people who, at this time with this economic downturn, their role is the supporter and the bread earner. Now without their job, they're lost. Their whole identity has gone down the drain. They're miserable, they're depleted, they're powerless. How can this be so? How can the Son of God be powerless? But we render ourselves powerless because we have attached the meaning of our identity to that. Interestingly, other people would identify with their illness. So if you miraculously took away their illness today, well, they'd die. They'd die because they're totally attached to their illness as their identity, as their means of getting respect or love or compassion or sympathy. Can you see? Same with money, wealth. So as Nouk said before, it's not only how you might identify yourself, but ask the question, what would you be lost without in your life? See, because all of these attachments, the ego will use to hurt you. Now, I myself, I have a role as a father. Nouk has a role as a mother. And yes, we are very proud of our daughter, Ricky. But even in saying that, I recognize the specialness of saying our daughter, Ricky. There is a girl called Ricky that we raised. She is a spirit unto herself. And in fact, and we'll share this later on, we'll show you how she was our teacher. And in demonstrating how she was a teacher to us, it totally obliterated this false perception that I, as a father, actually knew anything about fatherhood. See, anytime we really fully attach ourselves to anything, we're closed off to learn anything more about it. And we've limited ourselves. Remembering that before this tiny mad idea of the separation, we did remember who we were, which was pure awareness, pure creativity. And here we are limiting ourselves to all these false idols that we've assembled around ourselves in a circular shape, like wagons circling us. My job, my role, my ethnic identity, my language, my money, my college degree, whatever. All of these things that take so much energy to uphold, and none of them are you. So take the time, as Nouk said, to honestly review what are your sacred cows, what are your 5 favorite illusions of self.